February of 1993 when I was first in the Assembly and introduced a bill modeled after the Santa Monica bulletin board system that would have put legislative information on a dial-up bulletin board so that computer users who had a modem, at that time they were 300, 1200, and 2400, could get information about what the legislature was doing. And a couple of guys, and they were guys, came into my office and they explained to me about this thing called the Internet. This is February of 1993. And they suggested that I amend the bill to have the information posted on the largest non-proprietary computer network in the world, which I did. And then I had to go around the Capitol and explain what the Internet was to 119 other legislators. There were a couple who knew. Henry Mello had CompuServe running on a PC in his office, and he had, there wasn't much available, but he had weather information up, I remember. So in any event, the bill passed, and we've come a long ways in government since then, although some of the discussions that we had when that legislation was going through are still discussions that are ongoing right now. Now, I think it is a false assumption to just assume that everyone on the planet is going to be on the Internet and do everything online. And I noted that the Associated Press ran a story this morning talking about the millions of people who just say no to the net, who have access, who either, this is in the B on page A8, I'm sure it ran in other places too. I actually read it on the Internet last night before this morning's paper was out. But there's a large number of people who are what they call netless by choice. It sort of reminds me of the childless by choice discussion. Some of whom were online and gave it up, others who just don't want to go online, don't see the benefit. We have some of those in our midst in the legislature. Probably the most notorious is John Burton, who, our Senate pro tem, who for a long time used his chamber's laptop as a hard writing surface until finally he asked the Secretary of the Assembly first and then the Senate to just remove it so that he had more room for the paper on his desk. So we have that number of people, and we also have a large number of people who do want to change to the Internet and don't have access, and that's some of what we will be talking about this morning. We have an ongoing discussion about who should bear the costs of providing web, email, and Internet service and access to government. If you take 2 hours off work to go stand in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles, or a half an hour if you made an appointment, should you pay less, more, or exactly the same as somebody who either logs on and conducts the same transaction at home, or someone who uses their computer at work to do the same transaction and therefore doesn't have to take off time during the workday? This is a discussion we had when we were putting the legislature online. There were those who wanted to see the legislature charge an access fee for access to information about what the legislature was doing, and in fact some states do that. But when I was carrying the bill, I actually had a nightmare about Thomas Jefferson going on the Home Shopping Channel and hawking the Constitution for 1995, and decided that we just shouldn't set as a precedent charging people for access to information about what their government was doing, and so ultimately the charging provision was removed. And it is not that access is free. There still are very few dial-up Internet service providers that are free, although Kmart's Blue Light Special is one of them. And it actually works. I used it last week from Denver. So we still have to talk about this issue of distributing costs. We still have to talk about access to people who are wired, people who are not wired. In Senate offices, we certainly deal with the issue when we get email from constituents who may expect that they deserve an answer instantaneously. That's the culture of the Internet. Whereas people who write a letter may not expect that they will get an answer the same day. And so we've had to make an explicit policy about making everyone's questions and commentary equal, not putting emailers ahead of snail mailers, faxers, or telephoners, so that we don't inadvertently favor those who happen to have technology access. And then, of course, we just have the general issue of human contact, and I think the great frustration of answering voicemail mazes and press this button for that and that button for that is not something that we want to see replicated across all levels of government when somebody has a problem and just can't get through the maze to an answer. So a lot of issues that we need to grapple with, but we certainly are a long ways from where we were in 1993 when we were discussing what the internet was, and then again in 1994 when I had to ask then Speaker Willie Brown for special permission to establish an email address in the Assembly. So 6 years later, it's a normal part of our procedure, although we still have some members who do not use their email or don't have email access. So we should have an interesting discussion this morning. We're going to start with Steve Nissen from the Governor's Office, who is the acting director of the Office of, what is the official name of it? Planning and Research. I won't tell you what we usually
I think I know.
Anybody who wants to know, I'll tell you after the panel. Steve is tasked, among other things, with evaluating key state business practices that impact consumers and making recommendations for improvements through a process that relies on consumer input and the experience of state government employees. He is also responsible for looking for partnerships with the nonprofit sector that can help improve government efficiency and make government more accessible to people. I have known him since his days at Public Counsel. He spent a lot of time there after graduating from Stanford in 1972 and Bolt Hall in 1976. Now the format this morning is we're going to have each of our panelists go for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we should have, if everyone is close to on time, a significant amount of time for discussion and questions. And I have privately threatened the panelists that if they go over 15 minutes, I will make them watch all 8 of Governor Wilson's State of the State addresses back to back. Figure that should be a sufficient incentive to keep everybody in their 15-minute time limitation. So with that, let's welcome Steve Nissen. Thank him for being here this morning, and we're anxious to hear what you have to say about the future of e-government.
Thank you, Senator. Well, first of all, it is oftentimes in my job, I don't really know what it is I'm going to talk about or even where I'm going to go until about 5 minutes before it happens. This was kind of no exception. I ran into the office and I said, "There's something about e-government this morning. Where is it?" And the answer I got back, "Well, it's in the state capitol." And I said, "The state capitol is a big place." And with about a minute to go, I found out the room number, and now I think I've divined what the topic is. So I apologize for being late, but I also I have to tell you we're very fortunate to have Senator Bowen as the moderator because I'm fairly new to state government. I've been here a year and a half, but Senator Bowen really is a pioneer in bringing government up to the current times and now to the 21st century. And anything I say, if she makes faces behind me or hand motions, they'll probably be appropriate because she really knows better and knows where the bodies are buried and where the truth lies in this matter. But I'm going to try to talk a little bit about where we are and then where I think we're going with respect to e-government. And the first thing I thought I would do is share with you our working definition of e-government. This is, at this stage, because it's so developmental, it's sort of everyone's Rorschach test, and I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. Our working definition, and this is a work in progress, so if any of you on the panel or in the audience have additions, suggestions, critiques to the definition, let it fly. E-government defined as enhanced access to government information, delivery of government services, and participation in the democratic process through secure electronic technology that protects privacy, available anytime and any place, convenient to the customer. So let me quickly break that down. There are 3 pillars that we're looking at: access to government information, delivery of government services, and participation in democracy. Those are the 3 pillars. And then the technology aspect of it is electronic. Notice we didn't say the internet because As Senator Bowen correctly points out, some are wired, some are not. We don't know what the technologies will be 2, 3, 5 years out. We will be using telephones to do these transactions with touch tone. Will we be using interactive television? Will there be instruments in our automobiles that will allow us to do these transactions? We don't really know. So we use the internet as sort of a catch-all phrase, but it is by no means the exclusive way to engage in these services. We also note that another cornerstone of e-government is technology that protects privacy. E-government isn't worth a darn if people refuse to use it because they fear their privacy will not be protected. And finally, in terms of customer convenience, the point of e-government is we don't have stationary buildings that are open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We have a service that's available anytime, anywhere that happens to be convenient to you. And I think the example that I often give is when we've been working with the DMV, one of the primary customer interface departments in California. The first thing we did with the DMV is put registration on the web. Now, there are 30 million registrations a year in California, so that's perhaps the single most prevalent customer-to-state transaction there is. And while most citizens don't really know what jurisdiction takes out their garbage, they do know that the DMV is related to the state, either because we sit on our wallets every day and we sit on our driver's license, or we carry it around, or we use it on a daily basis. And so when the DMV fails, in effect, the state fails in terms of customer service, and vice versa when the DMV succeeds. We had a number of public outreach conferences. We put DMV registration on the web. Now, how do we improve the face-to-face retail operation at DMV field offices? And someone piped up in Envisioning the DMV of the future and said, and we had graphic artists with a roll of butcher paper that went from one end of the wall to the other, and they were drawing these ideas as people were offering them up. So there's now a giant mural somewhere of the DMV of the future. And one of the pictures is Brian is on a camel in Egypt while touring the pyramids and realizes in 12 hours his registration will expire. So he pulls out his PDA and wires to his DMV his registration renewal information and receives a confirmation while traveling around the Sphinx. And of course, this is projecting well into the future, but the goal is the technology exists. There are many different ways to provide the service rather than the very stationary way that we currently provide it. So let me tell you some of the things, that's the definition of e-government, by the way. Let me tell you some of the things that we plan to do. And remember, you've probably heard a fair amount of criticism, and much of it appropriately placed, and some of it coming from the senator to my right. And again, quite appropriate. California has lagged behind in the public sector, certainly compared to the private sector. Our accomplishments in Silicon Valley are second to none in the world. Our accomplishments in the public sector in terms of e-commerce and e-government are second to many. We rank near the last, near the bottom in many statewide comparative surveys. That's going to change. And it's going to change for a number of reasons. But one, an executive order was just released last week on e-government from the governor, a very powerful and far-reaching executive order which puts e-government on the front burner of issues. In the state of California, we have 120 different departments, agencies, commissions. They've all developed technology separately. It's like a technology Tower of Babel. They don't communicate with each other. We spend a lot of money developing separate technologies, and then when a customer wants to use that technology, It's not always that accessible, and they always have to go to different departments to get different services provided. And if you're a customer, you don't care what the name of the department is that gives you a license or a permit. You don't, if you're a business that wants to open in California, you don't really want the 4 dozen different departments that might regulate you. You don't really want to find out what their 48 different telephone numbers are and what their names are and track them all down and fill out forms in a particular order required by each and every one of them. You just want to go to one place and say, from my perspective as a customer, I just want to open a business. And what the state of California is committing to do is to create a so-called portal, one address, one place that you dial up and you click on your customer need. In this case, I want to open a business. You click it on, you put in your name and your address and type of business, and then the program will lead you through. It will say, well, now you need to go to a place called EDD, Employment Development Department. And there you'll put in some additional information. Never enter the same information twice. And then the program will take you to the Franchise Tax Board and to Cal OSHA and to Cal EPA and wherever the appropriate agencies are that might have a regulatory piece of you. So that literally in about an hour and a half you can go through the entire process, never file a wrong form because the program takes you there, never waste a moment trying to figure out what department you're supposed to go to because government provides the service to get you there. What would take an hour and a half on the net or by some other electronic means currently takes about 3 months to a year. So imagine this revolutionary change in service. Today, you're trying to play by the rules, you're trying to open a business, and you find it takes months and months and months of frustration, and all it takes is one wrong form or one lost form, and you go back to square one. Extremely frustrating for hundreds of thousands of small businesses in California. And this is a way to eradicate that frustration. It also allows us to link to local government, which also regulates small business. And the same possibilities exist there, again, alleviating the need to go from department to department. Now, imagine this stretches across all kinds of customer services, from access to health and social services to professional licenses. By the way, just flag me down. I don't even know when I started. So
you have 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. In the professional licensing area, as another example, there are probably a total of about 3 million folks, from doctors to dentists to nurses to psychologists to real estate appraisers, who are licensed in the state of California. And it's all done with redundant forms and 3x5 cards currently. It's a pretty big consumer base. Now, the old way of doing business in California is across the range of state government, there are probably half a dozen different departments that license people to do things. They don't talk to each other. They use different systems. And to the extent they use technology, as I said before, they invest in totally incompatible technologies. So what we're doing is we're saying every dollar that goes into e-government will be channeled not to each department so that they can develop their technologies in a sort of a siloed fashion, one isolated from the other, but we'll pick programs, activities, customer services, in this case, licensing, and we'll gather together everyone in state government and identify those agencies that provide licensing activities. And we'll say, you know what? You're not going to budget the traditional way. You're not going to fill in a certain level of dollars and get your full-time equivalents, which in state service we call PYs. Took me a few months to figure out what a PY was. We're not going to budget that traditional way because we know that once you've got PYs in your budget, you'll never give them up. And we can't really account for whether you're spending this money efficiently. Our goal is to create an e-government professional licensing program. We're going to bring all of the agencies together, have them commonly design a system that will work for all professional licensing, because in the end, it doesn't matter to the customer whether the name of the licensing agency is the Department of Consumer Affairs, if you're a registered nurse, or the Department of Real Estate, if if you're a real estate appraiser or a certain type of health technician, if it's the Department of Health Services. That just doesn't matter to the customer. They just need to get their licensing done. And this may seem, to those of you who've had no experience with the state, this may seem like the most logical thing in the world, but it's never been done in the state. Things have always been emanated from separate departmental budgets, and e-government will drive a fundamental change in that behavior. And I have 3 minutes. That was only 2 minutes. How did I lose it? I wanted to talk a little bit about the DMV and the program we have up, because it at least covers one of the very important issues that Senator Bowen mentioned, and that's who bears the cost of this. One of the problems with California is we have many famous technology failures. The DMV, whenever one thinks of technology and whenever an article is written about the DMV, usually there's reference to a $51 million investment to revamp the DMV's database. And that $51 million is about 5 or 6 years ago in another governor's administration, whose name was previously mentioned. That $51 million literally was flushed down the toilet. The database was absolutely useless and the money was wasted. And that appears in most articles. We spent $417,000 to build an e-government system currently that's available for 30 million registrations for automobile registration. Nobody writes about it. It's a smashing success. All of our customer surveys indicate over 93% overwhelmingly favorable or very favorable responses. Now, nothing and nobody in government gets that kind of approval rating. Yet that kind of success is not recognized, because so far those kind of successes are in the minority when it comes to technology. Now, the interesting thing about this DMV program is most comments are, easiest thing we've ever used on the internet. 3 clicks and you're done. 48 hours later, you get your registration tags. A revolution in customer service in the government. But the issue of who pays for it is terribly important in the success of this project. Before July 1st of this year, the government, the DMV, underwrote the cost of the credit card transactions. It's about 2%, just slightly under 2% of the cost. Typical registration cost is about $220 when everything is added up. So about $4 extra to use your credit card on the internet. For the first 4 months of operation, the registration program was in effect paid for by the DMV, absorbed by the DMV. After July 1, because of budget language inserted, there was a requirement that the customer, the constituent, pay the 2%, the extra $4, for the convenience of using the internet and not standing in line or registering in some other fashion. And the usage of the DMV program went down by 30%. So whereas before July 1 we had 1,000 users a day, now we're down to 700 or so in round figures. Now,
can you go to AAA and pay with a credit card without paying that?
You can go to AAA, you can pay with a credit card, and because they have actually a special license, you can also give up $45 of your hard-earned money to have AAA do that for you.
Okay, so they don't...
They're in a special category, AAA,
Right.
and there are a few new card dealers. So it's not a cheap way to go. So this is a fundamental problem, because if you've got, for example, with DMV, you've got, of the 30 million vehicles, many people have multiple vehicles. About 23 million individuals are involved. If you multiply 2% times every single transaction, that's in the tens of millions of dollars. And at some point, arguably, people could say, you know, if you continue to charge people extra for this convenience, it's almost like a new tax, a hidden tax. Other people will say, well, the government can't really absorb it with the current budget, because as usage goes up, the funds we're talking about become an enormous sum. On the other hand, e-government will drive convenience and efficiency, and at some point, not tomorrow, but certainly some years down the road, the cost of delivering government services will go way down. The cost of handling an envelope and stamping the paper and multiply stamping forms is enormous compared to one electronic transaction.
Actually, that's what I was just going to ask you. How much does it cost the DMV to process a check? And does anybody figure that, or because that's internal, you don't have to recover that in the fee?
Okay. It's a great question. Let me give you the DMV's answer, and then let me raise my eyebrows. Because this, too, is fundamental to the future of e-government. What does it really cost? The DMV will say if you mail in your transaction, and about 58% of Californians did, at least as of last year, that cost about $3, maybe $2.83 in transaction costs for the DMV, the folks who get the envelope, open it up, stamp the form, put it in whatever piles they put it in. If you walk into the office and do that same transaction, it costs about, $5 or $6. More intensive personnel time. If you do it by internet, the DMV says that's closer to $11. Now that's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense. Every economic study shows that the virtue of an electronic transaction is it cuts out a lot of these paper steps. But the reality is, in the way we do state budgeting, everybody counts that initial investment in the technology. And initially, instead of reducing staff, people put in more PYs, more position years, to support this new technology while we're transitioning from a paper-intensive to a technology, non-paper-intensive regime. I think those calculations are probably accurate over a 1 or 2 year time horizon. What this state lacks in terms of a budget analyzing process is what is the real cost of the investment in these new technologies? Yeah, you spend millions of dollars up front, but what does it mean over 5 years in terms of the ultimate efficiency in government? We don't really have a good way of measuring that in government. The private sector has taken that head on and said, our return on investment isn't just measured by how many dollars we put in and how many dollars we get back. We look also at what kind of customer loyalty and branding that we can build and other customer-based responses.
And you're functionally then forced to write off the entire investment at the very beginning, rather than as the private sector would do it and say, this is a 5-year investment, and each year we're going to take 20% of the cost and apply it.
Right, and the typical budget, and the senator's now seen many of them, there's not a whole lot that's amortized in this state. It's 1 year and on to the next year.
Okay. All right. You want to wrap up?
I'll have an opportunity, okay, I'm sure, to jump back in. I just
sort of did some of the questions early. We'll take audience questions later, but I think it's worth having a discussion about what does things cost and how do we budget, because that's part of the future.
So I just, to put this in historical context, last year, while many states were forging ahead with their e-government projects, and many of them are much smaller than California, California was focused on Y2K remediation and spent all of our technology efforts and much of our technology money in that, and it was a great success. This year, we really start to see the fruits of our efforts in building an e-government regimen, and I think next year you'll not only see DMV online, but you'll see a good dozen other projects that are large and meaningful and really transforming in the way that government provides services to people.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Particularly for figuring out what you were going to talk about and talking to us about something that was relevant in the space of about 3 minutes. I know that trick too. Our next speaker is Richard Chabran from the University of California at Riverside. He has someone I've worked with on digital divide issues in this year, and he certainly is no stranger to the hearing rooms of the Capitol, as he's been here to advocate for policies that would help the government address the digital divide. He has been very involved in a number of grants that deal with the digital divide. Computers in Our Future, a project funded by the California Wellness Foundation, the UCR Community Digital Initiative, and a whole host of other related projects have really been focused on this issue, and I am pleased to have him here today to talk about what all of this e-government means in communities that aren't necessarily wired, even though it's not because they don't want to be. Welcome. Since you have your back to me, I won't get to tell you when it's 3 minutes, so I'll have to ask you to watch the clock yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Bowen. Let's see. I think I'm going to try. Well, I guess I should sit down. I really was really pleased to be able to come today to talk about this topic, and forgive me for having my back to you so I can face the audience. But this is really an issue in both, I think, the success of our .coms in this state, as was noted as part of the title of the panel, and as we've been just hearing about the plans for the delivering of services and e-government, really has a lot of us thinking about really the need to really consider what Senator Vasconcellos called e-inclusion. So that's really what I'm going to focus on today, and share with you some of the data that we've been gathering and talk about some of the implications. So let me, and then at the end, what I'd like to do is just show a few just kind of like experiments, some of the work of the youth that work at our center, just as kind of an idea, give you a taste of some of the kind of nice things that youth are, how they're engaging in this new technology. So first, I'd just like to share some numbers with you. And the first is, like in the new economy, we talk about a lot. So what are the implications for our citizens, and what are some of the implications in terms of labor force participation and that kind of question? So we know that the majority of jobs today require technological skills, whether for young people entering the job market, people transitioning off of welfare, or workers looking to advance their careers. And wired workers, those who use computers either frequently or relatively frequently every day, make up, this number now is probably closer to 80% of the workforce in California. People who use computers on the job earn 43% more than other workers, and less than 2/3 of Californians who are employed but do not use a computer have health insurance. And in a national study that was called Nothing But Net, American Workers in the Information Economy, they found that 2 in 3 workers use a computer every day. 2 in 3 workers have access to a computer at home. And American workers spend an average of 3 hours per day on the computer. Half of America's workers spend at least an hour a day on the internet. And 8 in 10 workers use computers in the last month. So far we can see that this technology is being more widespread and used. But we also know that there is an issue that has been referred to as a digital divide, and it's one of those kind of concepts that's kind of fuzzy and has a lot of different kind of definitions. So I'd like to share with you what the definition that I use. The term digital divide refers to the inequities that exist with regard to the material capacity, acquired skills, and differential use of digital technologies that can either improve or diminish the quality of life. Material capacities like, the phones and computers and, and connectivity. Acquired skills, very important, literacy, reading, computer literacy, and computer fluency. So what are some of those inequities that have been noted? The Falling Through the Net study that was done by the Department of Commerce is probably the most often cited report. And it's been issued 3 times, and in their last one, they stated that by 1998, 46% of the Anglo population had computers compared to 23.2% of African Americans and 25.5% of Latinos. By 1998, Anglo households with online access had risen to 29.8%, while African Americans and Latinos was only 11.2% and 12.6% respectively. That same data was analyzed by the California Research Bureau for California, and they said compared to other race and ethnic groups, whites and Asians are more likely to have computers at home in both California and the United States, while Hispanics are less likely to have a computer at home than other groups. Although it's real important to look at the subgroups within those. So, for example, certain Asian subgroups actually don't have that high of access as if you look at the total group together. And in California, there are 2.7 million Hispanics that do not have home computers. So that gives you an idea that there's an ethnic dimension to this. There has been some other studies that have been done since that national study. And I think that, I haven't quoted them here, they suggest that there is a narrowing of the digital divide in that more people are acquiring computers and that Latinos and African Americans, their access to computers is rising. They don't really, those studies that have come out though, they don't really deal more specifically with what kind of computers people have and what they use them for, which is critical because we know that a life of a computer could be like, 2 or 3 years and then it's out of date. So somebody may have a real old one. So these are more like questions that we're going to need to have a lot more information on in terms of use for the future. But there has been some other studies that have been done in asking this question about the relationship of this digital divide to government. And this one was done by the California Public Policy Institute. And they found that Latinos are much less likely than non-Hispanics, whites, to use a computer on a frequent basis. And Latinos lag far behind whites in frequent use of the internet, and they are less likely to use the internet to gather political information. And since this is one of the fastest growing groups in the state, this should be alert to us about what the possibilities might be. In another study that focused more on media, they talked about how both African Americans and Latino children have less access to computers, but when provided the access, they use them at the same rate. So the other point that's mentioned now in much of the literature is that this is really part of a reflection not just of technology, but about where these groups fare in terms of income or other issues like education. And I like to quote one of my colleagues who likes to say, people aren't poor because they lack access to the internet, they lack access because they're poor. So we need to sometimes remember that. So what are some of the key issues that if we want to promote e-government that we're going to have to consider? One is that there is going to be, I believe there will be a persistent problem with access. As we develop new technologies, low-income communities may not have access to those new innovations. Another one is acquired skills and what they use them for and what the content that they're going to be using them. And I covered a little bit about these preconditions, so I'm going to skip over them. But the one that I really want to move forward on is there's been a lot of discussion really about the whole issue of access. But I think there has not been enough discussion, as was noted last night by Magda Escobar, really about what acquired skills. And there's this one report that's called Being Fluent with Information Technology that was released by the National Research Council. And this is how they define it. Information fluency includes the ability to use today's computer applications and apply information technologies immediately. It requires people to understand the basic principles and ideas of computers, networks, and information which underpin technology, and to possess the intellectual capabilities to apply information technologies in complex situations. So it's not just having access, it's do you know what to do with those tools? Do you know how to apply them in your everyday life? Do you know how to apply them in your educational experiences, in your work, and how you can use them in terms of e-government? So I think that's really one of the things that we need to focus on. So what are some of the key institutions that I think can really help us to move forward in this? And I've outlined educational institutions, libraries, and community-based organizations. And I'm going to focus on community technology centers. 3 minutes, okay. Okay, so these centers we know are important resources. This was a National Science Foundation found that these kind of centers were important resources for women, girls, people of all ages, and members of racial and ethnic groups. And they offered a range of opportunities to use computers and other technologies. And they were a valuable resource for obtaining job skills, and they had a positive impact on the educational goals and experiences of their participants. And they importantly offered a place and a sense of community for some of their members. And right now there's a whole kind of range of different community technology centers, and we're really thinking about developing a typology of what they are. I just wanted to share with you a couple of clips from our own community digital initiative. Just the youth that's there, they're really great, and it's really great to work with them. And we think that it's really important for them not to just be consumers, but to learn how to creatively use these new technologies. And we feel that if they do, then they'll be in a better place to be able to participate in both the future of e-government and in developing that government. So what I wanted to do here is see if I could get a couple of clips. Let me see if I can do this quickly, just to give you an idea of what some of our kids are doing. This is a little music video that they just have begun, just to give you an idea. So that's just one clip, and I just, basically, it was kind of dark on the screen there, but they are really creative. This was an experiment where we asked them to go and walk down one of the main streets there in Riverside and to pick up some of the images and sounds that they often see but have been become part of the background. And in order for them to do this, they actually had to use some programs to develop the music. They had to use the digital cameras. They had to put it all together into a short clip. It could only be like 30 seconds. So it really required a lot of planning on their part. And they're coming up with all kinds of great other examples, and I just wanted to share that one with you. But I think, again, the main point is that it's really important for them to be able to begin to imagine a different kind of world in order for them to participate in their civic government and for them to be able to describe the world around them in these new digital terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to your kids. That's pretty amazing. Imagine trying to do that when you were in 4th grade for audience members. And I think you're about to be overtaken by one of your colleagues who needs to use the computer. So, you know, in the true tradition of shared computer usage at a technology center, we'll boot you off and give Linda Fowles the keyboard. Linda coordinates the work of several Community Partners programs. Community Partners is a nonprofit. These programs provide technical assistance and support to nonprofits and collaboratives. And Linda's going to talk to us more about strategic initiatives that Community Partners is undertaking. And she told me that she can stay at about 10 minutes, which is good because we're late.
So if I don't, just yell at me and I'll speed it up. Can you all hear me back there? Okay, I know you probably can't see me because I'm height challenged, but I'll try to speak up. As Senator Bowen said, Computers in Our Future is a community-based technology access and training program. The center that Richard refers to is actually one of the 11 Computers in Our Future centers around the state of California. And I'm going to build off some of the comments he made about the digital divide. By technology access, when we talk about access to technology, we don't mean just to a box and a monitor. We mean, as Richard said, really true access to a tool which is increasingly essential for participation and opportunity in the civic and economic life of our society. And again, not just access, but also access to opportunities to learn to use the tool productively. Let me offer some ways in which access to technology is essential for some of the new forms of civic participation that are being created now due to technology. The first are the things that Steve Nissen talked about: voting, circulating petitions, registering with the DMV, renewing your library books, access online and via other telecommunications and technology services to government services. Technology is also increasingly important to connect low-income people to the opportunities of the new economy. Richard has already given you some statistics about the importance of technology literacy for the current employment situation. 60% of all jobs require technology literacy. Employed computer users earn about 43% more than non-computer users. That tells us that everybody needs to be technologically literate if they're going to have success in the workplace. Another opportunity of the new economy is the consumer side of it. You've probably all seen increasingly that large corporations and sellers of services offer discounts now for people who buy these services online. I guess the DMV is an exception to that, but many airlines, many telephone companies, we're seeing this increasingly as the digital age progresses. Access to information. Increasingly, people are not publishing hard copies of their reports and of their information. They say, check our website. Many commercials now on TV say, check our website. If you don't have access to the internet, you can't check the website. A recent survey by the Public Policy Institute of California says that when people decide how to vote in ballot propositions, 66% of all adult Californians who were surveyed said that the websites set up by the government or by independent organizations were somewhat useful or very useful in helping them decide about the issues and how to vote. Technology is also increasingly becoming important for communication. It's becoming part of our social network, a real connector among people. And it's important to support the effectiveness of the public and not-for-profit sectors. Technology is useful in many different parts of these sectors, such as economic development, youth development, violence prevention, employment preparedness, housing, etc. Let me step back now and talk a little bit more about Computers in Our Future. The objectives of the program are to improve access to technology, to training, and to jobs. We also want to raise the level of technology literacy in our communities so that people have full access and opportunity to use it productively. And we'd like to increase private and public allocations of resources to community technology. And I'd actually like to thank Senator Bowen for her support in this regard. As many of you may know, she has recent legislation to support community technology. And we think it's a very important step for the state of California to support technology at the community level more deeply than it has ever been supported before. Computers in Our Future is a demonstration project. As I said, there are 11 centers around the state of California. They're in a mix of urban and rural neighborhoods, all low-income neighborhoods, all across the state. And they're in many different kinds of organizational settings. They're in typical community-based organizations, multi-service centers, youth centers. We have one at a county health agency, one at a Native American Indian center, all very diverse. And the program is designed for comprehensive results. There are many different elements of the program. People have open access to the technology, so anyone from the community can go in and use the computers for whatever they need to do in their personal life. You can take training classes to learn how to use the technology, or you can do self-paced programs to learn at your own speed. The centers act as a community resource for technology. They work with community-based organizations and individuals in the community to help them. And they're also a community voice for policy. As Senator Bowen said, we've been doing a lot of advocacy to spread the word about the importance of community technology. We think the centers have been pretty successful. Over 80,000 people have used the centers, 18,000 people, and that's in about 2.5 to 3 years. They've made well over 80,000 visits, and they tend to stay about 2 hours each visit. That tells us that they're not just popping in to check it out, but they're actually doing something productive. The centers are also reaching the people who, as Richard said, are typically the unreached, people who have lower levels of education, people in certain ethnic and minority groups, and in low-income areas.
Can you
speed it up? Okay. The centers are really enabling civic participation. Participants take classes or use the open access hours to brush up on their technology and their basic skills. Kids complete their homework. They have a safe place to go after school. Kids and adults use the internet to look for a job or obtain information important about their lives. I have some examples, but maybe I'll save the stories for later if you want more information about that. And let me just say that we feel that Computers in Our Future is a model for how community technology can be used in California to bridge the access gap. There are a lot of reasons why community technology centers are successful strategies. We think one of the reasons is because each center is adapted to the needs of the local community. It's not a cookie-cutter thing. Community-based organizations, as you know, typically have friendly and inviting environments. They have staff who can work with the needs of the clients, who can speak the local language. They typically partner with other community organizations, with government institutions, with small and large businesses to really get work done in the community. And for these reasons, they're well positioned as community leaders and community resources. These are some examples of partnerships, some that I mentioned before: economic development, preserving Native American culture, employment preparedness, parenting classes. As Richard has alluded, and even Steve Nissen said, e-community cannot replace human communities, especially when we're talking about democracy. Our democratic system is based on humanity. It's based on trust, it's based on relationships, and thus we must be really careful as we're looking forward to the e-future of California to also support and nurture the human systems along with the technology. Community technology centers, especially those that embrace real democratic values and enable full civic participation for all people, are an important part of the answer to how the electronic age will transform government.
Thank you. Now, I suppose if we're using current hip technology, we would say we're going to drill down further to some real examples of what's happening in a specific community. And that information will be presented to us by Tessie Guillermo from the Asian and Pacific Islander Health Forum and the Community Technology Foundation of California. She has worked specifically with the needs of people in the Asian Pacific community and is a member of the White House Commission that is dealing with these issues. I'm looking forward to hearing your experience with e-government and wired communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and be really quick with this because I'm sure there's a lot of questions that you all have to ask the panelists. Let me just tell you that although I am here using my affiliation for my day job, I'm also I think primarily going to address my remarks relative to the Community Technology Foundation of California, which is a recently established foundation which is specifically focused on providing access and addressing issues of the digital divide to underserved and underreached communities in California. And so I'll sort of be a little schizophrenic and go back and forth between the Health Forum and the Technology Foundation, but bear with me. If you will. what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about some of the things that government does need to think about in developing sort of e-government, and some of the things that Steve talked about, what's going on in communities that they represent, and how government must think about responding to what is going on in communities. And some of this information is taken from focus groups that the Technology Foundation conducted last year throughout California in underserved communities, and in focus groups that my organization has actually done also in trying to look at technology acquisition and application issues. And some information pulled from grant funding requests the Technology Foundation has pulled together in a database. With regard to that, then there are two primary issues around access to technology, and they aren't a surprise. The primary one does have to do with access around digital divide issues, barriers to the utilization, which, for example, include technology jargon that makes it very difficult for people who don't have English as a primary language to try to adopt. It's difficult enough to translate everyday language, but technology jargon is something that is literally impossible in some instances. Training issues that you've heard spoken about earlier, transportation issues, access to technology outside the home for those who don't have technology in the home, at schools and libraries, and even at community-based organizations, becomes even more of a problem when you don't have transportation available to take you to those centers. And, of course, issues of privacy and security are things that came out of the focus groups around access issues. And then the other major issue is around content, another barrier. This is also issues of language, that there is not a lot of opportunity. The digital divide doesn't just address issues of socioeconomic status, but if the primary language of the internet and electronic commerce is English, then you're leaving out now a majority of the state of California in its ability to ramp up. So that is definitely a big piece of it. Local information seems to be something that people are very concerned about. It's wonderful to be able to access information that is general information for the major parts of the population, but I think people are interested in learning about what's going on in their community, and hopefully being able to use the internet and electronic commerce as a way to find out what's going on in their local community, in addition to cultural information, cultural content that is relevant to folks in their everyday lives. Some of the trends and observations that we have been able to gather, we fund in 4 primary areas of grant making. Those are in health, community economic development, community building, and education. And for the most part, they're focused on organizations that are 501c3 nonprofits. But for educational institutions and community economic development organizations, most are using computers as tools for learning and for training. In community action organizations, it appears as if most are looking to acquire and utilize technology applications for online case management and services referrals. For service providers, it's no surprise that many are looking to use the computer and technology around enhancement of services that they're already providing, as well as for administrative management within their own organizations. And then because we do a lot of work around the disabled community, a lot of work around and requests for funding around assistive technology, both in the sort of exploration of new types of assistive technology and the adaptation of that technology, not just in service organizations that specifically target the disabled community, but in many organizations that are not accessible to people in the disabled community because of those types of barriers. We're supposed to be talking about transformation of government in the electronic age, and I would like to say that especially in the 21st century, the transformation of government is as much, in the electronic age, is as much a function of its constituencies, government's constituencies transformation, as it is a function of technology itself, particularly in California's case. They are absolutely intertwined at this day and age. We are, sort of the leaders of technology acquisition and application, but at the same time, the 2000 census will document tremendous changes in demographics, as well as in the distribution of wealth and the bimodality, or the changes in socioeconomic status. And so at the same time, in California, we've got things that are going to help hopefully bridge populations, but we are at the point where there's, I think, a lot of soul searching as to how that is being done. Witness, the conference today and yesterday. So I think it's something that that we're all going to be struggling with, and it's reflected in the funding requests. Again, as I said, that the Technology Foundation has received over the past year in those 4 areas of priorities. And what we were doing. And I do appreciate a lot of the work that has been done in the establishment of community technology centers as really sort of a basic way to try and provide a learning opportunity and some training around technology. But I think as we look towards the future, and particularly around the integration of technology in one's everyday life, we are looking for integration of technology into existing programs and services that our grantees already do. So for instance, at the health organization, we're not looking for them to necessarily develop a technology center in their waiting room or as an adjunct to something that they already do. What we were hoping is that we would see some of the health clinics, for instance, try to figure out ways to integrate technology into their existing delivery of health services that would enhance opportunities for their patients to maybe learn more about the particular health problem that they're coming for, or to assist government to look for ways to access government services, do eligibility online, things like that. So that's what we're really looking for in terms of the funding that we do. But let me tell you a little bit about the character and the nature of those who are applying for funding, which gives an indication, I think, to those of us on the panel and you in the audience as to who's really looking to acquire technology and bridge the technology gap between those that have and those that have not. About 81% of those that have applied for funding are serving the Hispanic Latino community. About 69% are serving African American community, 63% serving the Asian community. And so you can see that the demographic is something that is very, very diverse. 95% are serving low-income populations. 57% are serving the disabled community. 69% are serving a limited English population. And the overwhelming types of organizations are human services agencies that are really, as I said, trying to bridge the gap. Just in terms of some overall trend, this is what these organizations are trying to do in their technology endeavors. There's a philosophy of build it and they will come still, which we, I think, have to overcome, because we all know that this is not necessarily true, that if you build it, they will come to a technology center. There's a limited understanding of how people learn technology. There's an issue of hiring technology people at nonprofit organizations, competition for that expertise, and obviously a big need for technical assistance. There is an issue around big established organizations who seem to be able to acquire and apply technology much more easily than small community-based organizations. There's a poor or limited understanding of accessibility issues, both with regard to the disabled community as well as limited English proficient populations and so on. And then interestingly, this is something that I think people tend to not think about, that with all the computers and technology, very few addressed issues of ergonomics, which I think is something that we all need to pay attention to. We don't want to acquire and move ahead in the technology age at the cost of our physical health. So I think that the message of the day, again, coming back to some of the focus group information that we received in the technology applications, that keeping high tech together with high touch is something that still comes through. Human services organizations that are trying to incorporate technology are still emphasizing that nothing replaces the human face in terms of interaction. So, dollar costs considerations, aside, governments face is both human as well as digital, and that's something for us to remember. And then that really we ought to be thinking about technology as a way to bridge communications. This is nothing new, and really is a matter of increasing the integration of those who are on the margins into the rest of society. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of good food for thought. Pent-up questions are now welcome. Anyone? No one? Okay, yes.
Question is for Steve. As you mentioned that California is somewhat behind the times on the e-government stuff. As you're looking to other states, are there good examples of states that have addressed some of the issues of access as they roll out e-government? And what would you have suggestions for where, if we were interested to see what other folks have done to take care of those issues?
Everybody hear the question? First of all, government probably is not the ideal driver of providing access to everyone in this with respect to high technology. It's probably going to be the private sector, but government has to play an important catalyzing role. Are there great examples from other states? Not really. Some states have at least made noises about putting a computer in every student's hands in every classroom, or a computer in every child's home. That hasn't quite happened yet, although those proposals have been made. They're often in very small states. And frankly, that really doesn't address the problem. As I was listening to Richard Chabran, I suspect that in the Asian community, the Hmong community, if every member of the Hmong community had internet access, there isn't content out there. So simply having the machine and the internet access doesn't do it. In the Latino community, I suspect that monolingual Spanish speakers would use to a much more limited degree that internet access than bilingual Spanish-English speakers in the Latino community. So there are a lot of problems that government alone can't solve in terms of the content that's out there. Remember, the internet as a commercial device in the last several years has been driven effectively by middle to upper class commercial values. And as the internet really becomes a more useful commercial tool for broader groups of people, then it'll become a more effective and accessible tool for government. What can government do, though, and what has the state of California started to do? And these are really small and imperfect steps, but it's a beginning. One, we've certainly made a commitment to, in effect, double the number of computers and connectivity in our classrooms. And I think most studies will indicate if you can get kids early enough and in a setting where there's appropriate supervision, their ability to use computers in an effective way is enhanced. So hundreds of millions of dollars were committed through the administration's budget and passed by the legislature to wire the schools and increase the backbone, enhance the backbone that wires communities together. There's more outreach to rural communities who don't have the same level of connectivity and access. And there are more and more programs that are springing up in neighborhoods, and Senator Bowen, as was mentioned, has a bill that my boss has not yet acted on.
But we know it's going to be favorable, right?
Well, we know it'll be acted on in 8 or 9 days, as a matter of constitutional requirement. There's certainly more and more involvement of public libraries, of local community organizations. But there is no perfect solution yet that's come from any governmental body. And some of the more interesting solutions, frankly, are coming from the private sector and a number of Silicon Valley programs that try to get computers into the families of workers' hands and and provide various benefits and free access and those kind of things, I think will really open the door far more than government can, but government's got to be an active and involved partner.
I can suggest a few websites or places for information if people want to check out what's happening in other states and at the federal government. The National Council of State Legislatures would be a resource for what's happening in other sites. I think the website is ncsl.org. They actually have done a number of programs at the annual meeting. I think tapes are available. There was a program on the digital divide that I believe is available on the web as a webcast, courtesy of IBM's Center for Electronic Government. Governing Magazine, which I think is just governing.com on the web, also has done a lot of work in this area. Some of the funding for the programs has come through AmeriCorps. And that's, of course, a federal program, AmeriCorps and VISTA, which provides volunteers. Their program that's a partnership with America Online is called Power Up. And that information is available, I think, on the AmeriCorps website. So those are some starting places, I'm sure, from between NCSL, IBM's Center for Electronic Government, Governing Magazine, and the AmeriCorps site. You can get a pretty good head start on what's happening, both on digital divide issues and NCSL. That would be focused more on what other states are doing, what kind of services have gone online, and what the success is, because states have experimented very differently. Actually, Kansas has done a lot more than many other states. You may be surprised. I think it's easier in a smaller state with a more homogeneous population, harder in a state that has the demographic and challenges and the breadth of California, and scalability is always an issue. If your DMV only registers 1 million cars, it's a whole different computing problem than if it registers 30 million. So, question, yes.
My question is also for Steve.
How about if you stand up, because then we can embarrass you and then we can all hear you better.
My question is also for Steve. I'm just curious as to whether or not California government is looking into developing online voting for official elections.
Online voting is the question? Actually, that's the panel next door.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what Governor Davis has said about it, and that is that he knows online voting will come someday, and it may very well come by the next presidential election, but he's taking a very cautious approach to it. One, it depends on what you mean by online voting. If we mean that we'll provide one more access point at a polling booth, one more method in which to vote to speed things up, that's one thing, because there's certain security and privacy controls at the polling place. If you mean you can vote from your home or at workplace.
Or the camel.
Or the camel. Or orbiting the Earth, wherever you may have, astral projecting, wherever you may happen to be, that's a whole different level of security. And we just don't have confidence yet that technology is a place where we can really protect the sanctity and security of that vote. Now, I know the Secretary of State, who has played a leadership role in this area, has the same concerns and has had a task force that's been very involved in these issues for some time, and at least so far has reached similar conclusions. Now, you're going to see, not statewide, but we're already seeing examples of local elections, or at least small portions of local elections done electronically, and I think you're going to see dozens and dozens of experiments in electronic voting before we do something like a statewide effort, and I think that's kind of our research and development effort in this arena before we go statewide, because the worst thing that could happen is to do a statewide election and have it riddled with fraud and compromise, and that will end dramatically our progress to doing this online.
Actually, I think it's useful to think about the conflict between privacy and security in the context of online voting. In order to have the kind of security that the person who is voting is the person who's registered, you need a pretty high level of confidence. That means that whatever the ballot that's cast is very likely linkable to whoever cast the ballot. So doing the security right means you jeopardize the sanctity of the ballot box and the privacy, and I don't think we have really addressed that concern yet. When you're voting at the polls, or if you're cleared at the polling place and you go in and use the equivalent of the old voting machines that I knew in Chicago 25 years ago, where if you wanted to vote a straight Democratic ticket, you only had to pull one lever, but if you wanted to split your ticket, you had to go through resetting the whole machine. It was an interesting technology. It was designed to encourage you to do the simplest thing.
How many times did you get to pull the lever?
Only once, but that's because I wasn't dead. In any event, if you're cleared at the polling place and then go in, you can preserve that privacy of the way that the ballot is cast, because there's no way for the machine to know which person went into which cubicle with the machine. If you're voting from home, it's a whole different issue, and trackable, as we have found on a whole host of internet transactions. Things are much more trackable than people ever expected they would be. Just ask the guy who committed stock fraud from my district a couple of weeks ago, and it took the FBI, I think, all of 5 days to sort out what hotel room he'd placed trades from and where he was. And it was at El Camino College, which raises whole issues about community access and use of the computer system. That fraud was conducted from a community college, from the library. There was a, yes?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, this is for Steve also, how the state intends to protect the proposed online programs from the fraudulent and abusive internet users.
Firing squad, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, use of best technology. So I'm actually the wrong person to answer that question because I'm not a technologist. But you know, the state isn't building a whole lot of these programs itself anymore. We've had a brain drain of technology employees here. They've all moved on to the private sector. Many of them have. We've lost a tremendous number of people. So we contract out for a lot of these services, and we recognize that people aren't going to use the internet, at least with respect to government, unless they're assured that there's security and privacy is protected. But we really have to rely on state-of-the-art of what private vendors provide to ensure that kind of security, and written into most of the so-called RFPs, requests for proposals, and requests for solutions, and requests for interest, and all the requests we send out to private vendors is a requirement that the highest security levels are achieved. You know, we're learning along with everyone else, along with the private sector. So far, nobody has assured me there's a perfect security technology system out there.
Yes.
It strikes me that before we can get e-government complete, the digital divide has to be overcome. Perhaps Richard could remark on his understanding of how fast that can happen, if it can happen in a complete fashion to make e-government reality.
What was the question?
How fast can we close the digital divide so that we can make e-government a reality? What's your expected time frame? Besides, I know it's slower than you would like.
Okay, well, I really, as I tried to note in our discussion, was that this is not related just to a matter of technology, but of literacy. And so, you know, I think the challenges that we face in education are a very big part of that. So I wouldn't phantom to guess that. But I do think that there's a lot that can be done. The kind of investment in education that Mr. Nissen talked about, that, you know, that's very important. I think we, you know, really need to have more robust, you know, my own personal feeling from both the private and public sector in addressing this. And in doing that, really of finding a lot of different kind of ways to address this. One is, supporting alternative modes of access is one of those I think is important. The educational one is another one. And also I think the development of training programs that will help bring more people into the workforce that, in a way that really allows them to earn living wages. I think that's really important. So I don't really think that I would phantom to guess a time. We kind of know what we need to do, but there's still a lot. It's a big challenge right now.
The other thing about that is that it isn't just the, as you said, it's not just the training, the provision, it's really a generational issue. And when we look at how kids learn, how they learn any skill, a lot of it is learned through creative play. So people say, well, gee, you give kids a computer at home and all they do is play computer games, or maybe they run Math Blaster. But when I see 3-year-olds who have mouse skills, I have a nephew who's 3 who can close Blue's Clues and turn off the computer, knows which radio buttons to press. He's already got that, basic, how does the thing work, that took many of us who were busy typing, copy A:**, space, and then getting that same message, about that we hadn't done it right. Our kids aren't going to go through that as we continue to change technology. Do you have a comment on that?
I wanted to just add to that. I too wouldn't hazard a guess. I think it'll be probably longer than everyone in the room would like. But I really think it's a two-sided equation. One side is what you do with the technology. It's the things that we're talking about, access to government services. It's the things Tessie was talking about, integrating the use of technology into everyday components of our life, into the healthcare system, into the school system. And then the other side is the access side. And it's actually too bad there aren't people here from schools and libraries and advocates of home-based access, because community technology is not obviously the only way to go. But all of these pieces have to work together so that everyone has access to the technology, and then it's used productively and effectively.
Actually, though, when you talk about how long it takes something to be adopted, I think and we've had this discussion in the legislature, is the internet and electronic access going to be more like the adoption curve of television, or more like the adoption curve of the telephone? And I'm reminded of not that many years ago when we saw video clips of a presidential candidate who was just figuring out how a supermarket scanner worked. And think about that. Is there anybody at this point who doesn't get the basic concept of a barcode? So we are collectively, even if we don't know that we understand, I think we do collectively understand a lot more about how it all works. We are also more suspicious about how the information gets used. And I think the privacy issue is probably going to be one of the biggest ones that continues to be brought up. Yes?
I think your analogy to how TV was accepted is a good one. And if you think back on it, it started really galloping along. As the volume went up, the price went down. And that is one of the issues here. Is right now, if you're barely getting by, you can't afford a couple $1,000s for all those pieces you want. Well, when it's $300 or $400, we're going to see almost everybody have it, just like everybody has a VCR today, even if you are on food stamps.
One of the real challenges, though, is that the way our current access to the internet is set up is people generally have to pay a monthly fee. And people in the room may not know that our telephone penetration rates are only about 94% across the country. And part of the reason for that is because if somebody hits a tight month, they can't afford to pay the bills. It costs a lot of money to get the telephone reinstated. And that's one difference between buying the computer and then maintaining the access, is you've got to keep paying every month.
But I think we're going to see that change too. And I deliberately did the experiment with Kmart's Dot.com free internet service provider, because I wanted to see what is this really like. And I don't know about using it in rural areas. There's an issue about paying to reach the local node. But at least if you're in an urban area, I found that dial-up faster than the big commercial internet service provider that I've been paying $21.95 a month for. And that's geared at reaching a different group of people. So if you're used to shopping at Kmart, and you start understanding that you can get online, you can dial up without having to pay a monthly fee, we may see that people decide that the equipment price is more affordable if they don't see that ongoing subscription fee. Although I've noticed plenty of places where people are not hesitant to pay cable subscription or satellite TV subscription fees. So perhaps, and if the two integrate, and that's very possible too, you may find TV and internet service provider isn't really a different thing in the not too distant future. Again, raising issues about privacy. Who gets access to that information about where you go, what you watch? Right now, if it's on cable, your cable company cannot collect or sell information about what you watch. But on web TV, the web service provider can track, sell, and disclose information about what you're doing on web TV.
Yeah, and also, just playing futurist for a minute. Last year, my father, who invests in high-tech stuff and then calls me afterwards and says, "What do you think of that?" And he invested in a particular computer manufacturer. Then he called and said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "That wasn't a real good idea." Because it seems to me, again, and I don't know, but playing futurist, there's no reason, actually, in the end, to pay money for a computer any more than you pay for a telephone. That's not where the big dollars are from a commercial perspective. The big dollars are in providing the service, providing the good, and the computer, just like a telephone, is only an instrument to get there. And so for some businesses, they're going to give you the computer. In fact, computer manufacturers may very well give you the computer if they've branched off into these other services, because they'll make more money on the other services using the internet as a delivery mechanism to get you the more expensive
Think
stuff.
about cell phones, for example.
Right.
How
Exactly.
much do you have to pay for a cell phone if you're willing to sign a service contract? It's generally zero at this point.
So, when we think about access and the digital divide, again, I just keep coming back to, in the end, the real driver of this is going to be the private sector and not government. Because 5 years from now, we can barely imagine what commerce is going to look like, and all the things that we use, telephones and computers and personal data systems and all that they might just give them away, like they do, little promotionals at the state fair.
A toaster at the bank?
They'll be all rolled into one little machine.
I think that the issue of availability is something that really doesn't, in the future, it's not an issue of availability. And so the cost considerations and the access considerations around availability aren't the thing that we have to worry so much about. It's really issues of content and some of the other access barriers that relate to almost anything that makes it difficult for folks who are either slow to acquire or unable to acquire access to anything. So again, for the populations that I'm familiar with, it is content.
Content skills, right?
Content skills. It's language. I just visited a community technology center in New York a couple of days ago, and it was a wonderful place that was built in a community-based organization that does job training. And interestingly enough, when they first established the center, it was free access, 12 hours a day in the community, and they were trying to teach people how to about technology skills or computer skills. But they weren't using the computer learning center, the community technology center, to assist people with job training. And they learned later on that this was exactly what they needed to do. In addition to that, what they found out is people were dropping in. They were asking questions. Well, how do I learn who else is doing this kind of stuff? Does my neighbor have something that? Are they learning something about the computer that I need to be learning about? And they gradually learned that one of the applications that they were building up as a service was to allow neighborhood folks to come in and build a community website, so that they can learn about what their neighbor was doing. They can learn about what services were available around the corner for people who work 10 hours a day, who don't really know what's going on in their neighborhood. And that has really sort of increased the the utilization of the technology center and the integration of that center with the existing services. So I think the equivalent of the private sector making it available to, mainstream populations, community-based organizations, schools, library, and those who provide services to those who don't have typical access are probably where we need to go.
Other questions? Okay. Here and here. We have time.
To revisit your comments on privacy, do you see there being a ceiling on people who use the government's e-government in California and elsewhere because of the natural fear, A, government, Big Brother, and B, somebody else may be watching, and therefore they won't access these services?
I actually think there is a concern, and when we put the legislature online, we specifically wrote into the bill that the government was not allowed to track who was visiting the legislature's internet access site. There was no World Wide Web at that point, so it wasn't a website. I actually got a printout about a year ago of who was visiting my website by IP address, and I had a heart attack because the statute prohibits the data center from collecting or tracking that information, aside from for quality control purposes where they ask people voluntarily. The reason was exactly because we didn't want to have a chilling effect on people's use of the information, and I think we've seen that very clearly in the healthcare area. There have been a number of stories lately in the media on CNET about people who visited a government-sponsored healthcare-related site, particularly if there's an advertising link. If the site is funded by advertising revenues, it may be that the advertiser winds up with a cookie on your hard drive that then allows it to track where else you go in a bleed-through on other websites. So there, I think, will be concerns about privacy. The security and privacy issues, interestingly, are largely the theft of Social Security numbers and information, largely not coming from government websites. In fact, most of it's not coming from internet sites at all. It's either the old-fashioned receipt, or it's an employee, like a Kaiser employee, who took Social Security numbers from Kaiser accounts and used them. But I do think that the experience of seeing some thefts of Social Security numbers and credit card numbers, whether it's Kaiser or Western Union, is going to make people think twice about using e-government and about conducting transactions. Less so if they're doing something that they would have to do, like if they're a registered nurse and they're registering, they're going to provide information anyway. So there's less concern there, I think, than there is if someone's doing research that they want to be blind.
This really brings up the great clash and conflict, not just of government, but of e-commerce in general. I think one of the reasons the problems haven't emanated from government so much yet is that government's not very good at doing
We're behind, so we haven't.
We're way behind, and the private sector's way ahead. So I just give you an example. We're looking at creating a statewide portal, one place where all of your life's transactions can go. And so we talk to these bleeding edge companies that are doing this stuff, and it's absolutely frightening. I mean, they're brilliant, and that's why they're making a lot of money, but here's what they do. In the old days, as in 3 or 4 years ago, if you wanted to get a sense of what the buying habits were of a particular person, you'd look at the demographics of their neighborhood. You'd do a zip code analysis. You try to figure out, based on sort of generalized habits of people like them, what person X was doing. But now, the way the internet is structured, person X has a personalized page, mywhatever.com. And private companies now know not just what person X bought on the web or what they looked at on the web, they know what they bought with a credit card down the block. And take that information and very scientifically determine what is one individual's buying habits in terms of what kinds of things do they buy in person, what kinds of things do they buy on the web. They know, these companies know, and then share it with other web retailers. They know if you walk into a Sharp or Image store. They know if you're the kind of person who would actually sit on one of those vibrating chairs in sharper image just to check it out, or whether you'd actually buy it in the store. They know if you're the kind of person who'd be embarrassed to buy such a thing at the store because people would see you, but you would buy it online. That is the level of specificity, and that's why discounts are offered for certain types of things online, but not for others, because it's tailored to you. And there are a whole lot of people, perhaps the majority of Americans, actually like that. They like the fact that Field and Stream magazine knows your fishing habits and so can push out to you the kinds of things that you like and want. Now transfer that to state government. What if the Department of Fish and Game knew what your fishing habits were and pushed out useful information? Some Californians would love that. Others would be horrified that the government knew that much about you.
You know, the issue is not really what Fish and Game tells you, it's that then is that a public record and who else has access to that information. But I mean, the kinds of concerns that Steve just outlined are the reason that my dog spends so much time on the internet, much to the puzzlement of the FedEx guy who delivered the videotapes that my dog had ordered a few weeks ago. He asked me, is there a Misha McDog who lives at this address? I'm being told we have to... Yeah, that's okay, you don't know how to spell it. You'll figure it out, I know. Linda has materials that are up here on the desk, and I'm sure there are other questions, but the next panel starts at 11, and so we're going to wrap. I want to thank people for coming, for caring, for engaging in this discussion. We're going to be talking about security, privacy, e-government, access, ergonomics, physical access, skill sets, and all of these things a great deal, again, in the legislature and in the governor's office and in the private sector and nonprofits over the course of the next few years. And it's great that you're here to really be a productive part of this important conversation. We are adjourned. Thank you.